My name is Grace Megumi-Fleming, otherwise known as Megumi Storyteller. I was born in Freeport, Illinois, but lived in Japan from age 3 to 10. My father was Caucasian American, my mother Japanese. I grew up bilingual and bicultural, moved around a lot, tumultuous life, the oldest of 5 kids. My art form today is storytelling. I would love to introduce the art of personal storytelling to all of you. The first story is called Sadako. Sadako loved to run. She loved the feeling of the wind in her hair, the rushing excitement of bringing her legs forward, and she was so fast she would even beat the boys. She was in 6th grade and she was so looking forward to going to junior high. Yes! Yes! It was so exciting! Sadako was born a healthy girl. When she was 2 years old, on August 6th, 1945, Pika! Dong! Pika was a blinding flash. People right underneath that bomb instantly evaporated. Dong! Was the explosion of an atomic bomb that the Allies dropped. It detonated over her city of Hiroshima 600 meters above the surface, 2,000 feet above the ground for maximum devastation. People who were staring at that plane and the bomb coming down, their faces charred black, their eye sockets turned hollow, and their liquefied eyes ran down their cheeks. If you were a little bit farther, like Sadako and her family, all they felt was a big boom. They felt it more than heard it. And all of a sudden, everything was dusty and everything was skewed. They had just sat down to breakfast, but they couldn't find Sadako. Where was she? They found her outside in a box. How did she get there? Nobody knew how she flew from inside the house out there. They were so lucky. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was killed in that family. They saw the devastation all around them. They evacuated to higher grounds. Eventually, their home burnt down to the ground, but the family was healthy. She was running, getting ready for that fall sports day when her relay team was going to win again. But no, she felt a little weak. She didn't talk about it. She didn't want to think that maybe she had the radiation sickness that she heard so much about. She kept quiet until, of course, they took her to the doctor, seeing her so weak. She was diagnosed with leukemia. As cheerful as she was, as much as she fought, there were bad days. There were days when her legs swelled up. Little blotches showed up. She was so weak some days it was hard to eat. But then she learned about origami. Somebody told her that if you folded 1,000 cranes, the gods will grant your wish. She was so popular at school, her classmates came to visit her. She had pen pals from other cities in Japan. And she folded and folded and folded her cranes, first wishing that she would get healthy again. And when she knew she would not get well again, she wished for peace. She wished for peace as she folded 1,000 cranes. And when she finished 1,000 cranes, she folded more. At the end, her paper cranes were so tiny she had to use needles, but she folded and she persevered until she was 12 years old. And on October 25th, 1955, 10 years after World War II, she passed away. She was buried with some of the cranes that she had folded and loved. Her story of her determination to pray for peace, her desire that children all around the world should not have to suffer as much as she did, traveled throughout Japan, went to Europe, went to Asia, went to Africa, everywhere. Now the story of Sadako and the 1,000 paper cranes is known by many, many, including you. You too can learn to fold paper cranes and wish for peace.
1,000 cranes for all the children of the world. 1,000 cranes, each one a prayer for peace. 1,000 cranes,
1,000 cranes.
see them circle in the sky, looking over all the children as they fly high.
I chose the story of Sadako because she's inspiring to me. I think if I had leukemia and knew I was going to die, I'd be quite resentful, definitely. I'd want to hide in a deep, dark corner somewhere and just die, maybe. But she stayed cheerful. Could I stay cheerful? Maybe not. Could I fold cranes? Yes. Could I share my origami skills with others? Yes. Could I tell her stories? Yes. And could I share my storytelling skills? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I hope you're thinking about how you can shine and how you can share your gifts even when you want to maybe hide in a deep dark corner somewhere and just disappear like me. Her brother, older brother, after she died, traveled throughout the world telling her story, meeting leaders, passing out her cranes as gifts. It's that too is really inspiring. So I have to think about what I can do for my loved ones who've deceased. Yeah. Well, a lot to think about. Thanks for listening. My next story is Jack's story. Jack was just 16 years old when he became the head of his family. Just 16 years old. Just a couple months after his 16th birthday, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And the United States was panicked. But probably the most panicked population in all of the United States were the Japanese Americans. Jack's parents had emigrated from Japan a few years before that. They were doing really well. They were community leaders. His mother was respected. His father was respected. And that's why after President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, the FBI came and arrested his father without any reason except for suspicion of espionage. They knew the jail they took him to, along with hundreds of other Japanese American community leaders. But when they took him to a prison, they didn't know where. And then the United States decided that all Japanese Americans on the West Coast were dangerous. So Jack's family was taken from their home in Watsonville, California on the coast to an assembly center and then to one of the 10 concentration camps. Jack, at 16 years old, was the head of the household. His mother didn't speak much English, so he was the main translator, the interpreter. What would you do if you suddenly became a 16-year-old head of the household? Your mother and your younger sister depended on you. The conditions in camp were comically primitive, but Jack found ways to laugh. He found humor. He found fun. He couldn't protest this outrageous injustice. He couldn't talk directly to the President of the United States. He had almost no power at all. So what did he do? He sketched. He sketched life in the concentration camp the way he saw it. He sketched people making long lines for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, for bathrooms, anything. But he found ways to laugh about it. In line, he would look for the prettiest girls and stare at them and dream. At sports events, he would find all kinds of interesting details in the way people lined up. In the old people, the young people, the babies, how they watched the sports, how the muscly brawns showed off their bodies, and how the scrawny but brainy kids excelled in school, questioning the teachers, for example, about the Constitution and rights. When the U.S. decided to draft young men out from these prisons, Jack went. He served in the military intelligence service. There were many, many confusing things, but all along Jack sketched. And in the 1970s, when things were a little bit better, he published a book about his experiences. In the 1970s and 80s, the Japanese Americans organized themselves, informed and inspired by the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And Jack celebrated that too. Undoubtedly, some of the people were really inspired by his sketches. Jack's gone now, but his story remains. And now you know his story. Whenever I feel powerless and down with conditions in the United States, I think about Jack and how he recorded history the way he saw it, the humor he found, and how he protested. Thanks, Jack. So that was Jack's sketches. Why did I choose it? Well, partly because in the early 2000s, I had the good fortune of meeting him and working with him. He was one of my heroes. I loved how gutsy he was that he recorded injustice as a 16, 17, 18-year-old. I also loved learning about laughing in the face of adversity, laughing when we're miserable. And I realize it's a way not to deny the injustice that's happening, but it's a way to protest something that should never happen again. He used the arts to record what happened. He used humor, and that makes it easy for a lot of us, even if we can't read, people of all ages. Sketches are amazing, amazing, amazing. So a perspective from a racially targeted American group, that's really super valuable too. I hope you're wondering what you could do. I know the arts are powerful, and I'm going to use the arts to express, confront what's happening. No matter how shy and unassuming you are, the arts are powerful. I intend to use them. I want you to think about that too. There once was a clueless king and a haughty queen who thought they were doing a great job ruling their people. They ruled in such a way with just enough rewards and just enough of a harsh punishment for each crime that the people worked and worked and worked, producing highly profitable but useless items. The children, they studied and studied and studied without much joy, but scored high on the scholastic scores. You know, the king and queen were pretty happy with the results, but they couldn't understand why the people never seemed to smile, why they weren't gushing with love for their awesome ruler as they should. One day, a dragon flew into the kingdom and caused such a terrible storm that she destroyed just about everything: the castle, the farms, the villages. The king and queen and their servants rushed to their cellar packed with luxury goods and hid. The villagers ran outside the city walls, and when they went into the mountains, they found a cave with fresh, beautiful spring water flowing. And there they hid. Now, when the dragon was tired of her temper tantrums, she went to rest in her cave, which happened to be the same cave as where the people were with the freshwater spring. There was an orphan girl who escaped out of the dungeon from a damaged wall, and she too escaped and found that cave with the people, with the freshwater spring, and a family of dragons. At first she was scared and wanted to run away, but something caught her eye, something that she had wanted all her life. She saw how the mother dragon took care of her hatchlings. She was so patient, so kind, yet firm. It comforted the orphan girl to watch that mother, her hatchlings. So she stayed. She stayed and watched, and she got closer and closer to the dragons, and the dragons got to know her better and better, and until one day the mother dragon explained that she was a water deity in charge of the ebb and flow, the tide of the oceans. She was in charge of taking care of all the creatures on earth by providing gentle rain and freshwater springs. She did have a bad day, though, that time that she created the storm, and she was really, really sorry. And to apologize, she offered the villagers help for rebuilding and resettling near the freshwater springs. Not only that, she was willing to teach her way of baby dragon rearing practices. Ooh, baby dragon rearing practices. They worked great for the baby dragons, but they worked well for human children and human adults too. The people accepted her offer, yes, and started rebuilding. Under the dragon's help, farms and businesses began to prosper. Schools and recreational programs just buzzed with excitement. And of course, the arts flourished. When the king and queen died and the servants returned to their people in the newly settled village, the dragons went back home to wherever they came from up in the sky. You want to know what happened to the little girl, don't you? Yeah, she became a hip-hop artist known as D-Ragon, best known for her songs like Listen and Freshwater Spring. As for the baby dragons, you know what happened to them? At the dragon farewell party, they found a big bag of garlic. It was so delicious, they ate the whole thing. Afterwards, they suffered a undeniably unpleasant breath. Hence the term dragon breath. So that was my freshwater spring, a personal story using fairy tale symbolism. I have to admit, I'm constantly working on myself, my past, my present, and future. There's a lot to face and lots of conflicts to work through. It's so much easier to talk about them if I have, well, my father as the clueless king, my mother as the haughty queen. I love the dragon who gets to throw temper tantrums because I didn't get to. And you're probably wondering, who the orphan girl was. You can probably guess. So every story needs conflict. Every story needs enemies that we have to fight. Every story needs heroes. I chose those characters. I hope that you're thinking about your story told with symbolism. Who would you choose for your enemies, or people who you thought were enemies, or situations that you thought were enemies? Who would you make friends with in a fairy tale format that you couldn't in real life? Who would be your dragon? So it's a fun way to tell your personal story. I sure had fun telling my personal story. Hi, Megumi here again. 語り部のめぐみです。皆さんどうでしたか? How was it? What did you think of these stories? Oh, I know. You're probably distracted by this guy, Tanuki. He's a Japanese mythical animal, a raccoon dog, a shapeshifter. To me, he symbolizes transformation. Speaking of transformation, Storytelling is deeply rooted in the traditional arts and has two components, transformational components, the listening and the telling. As an art form, it bolsters hope and courage and can be deeply healing. Like all expressive art, storytelling strengthens us so that when we need to listen to those who need to be heard, we can do so with respect, warmth, and an open mind. When we need to speak up, we have the voice, the hope, and the courage to do so. We can all stand up for ourselves and for others who may not yet have found their voices. On behalf of the Arts and Corrections Program, the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, and the Division of Rehabilitative Program TV. Thank you so much for watching. 皆さん、どうもありがとうございました。